approach to business. Welcome, everybody.
What's here is something that we are still building. It's something we cannot yet see because we are a part of it. Thoughts of a Brighter Future by the wonderful poet Mossab Abu Toha. Welcome to Pollinating Purpose, a caring approach to business by Pillar Nonprofit Network. I am your host and hiker in combat boots, Miriam Waliji. I also act as the Vice President of Equity, Impact, and Governance here at Pillar. For those of you who are new here, Pollinating Purpose is a show all about supporting organizations who seek to create social good through their work. Whether a nonprofit, for-profit, or grassroots organization, you'll learn key considerations to starting or growing your social impact business in a long-term and sustainable way. Today, we will be joined by a repeat guest, Rachel Berdan. Rachel is a facilitator of transformation at systems, organizational, team, and individual levels. Rachel is an active community collaborator who has worked across sectors and sizes of organizations as an entrepreneur, in formal leadership roles, and now as a coach and consultant. Rachel's personal and professional growth has been rooted in self-reflection, inquiry, and compassion in order to get grounded with herself so that she can keep showing up where her energy is best directed. Throughout her career, Rachel has focused on the importance of building and nurturing relationships, the power of collective action, and the potential of approaching necessary change while grounded in sustainability and justice. Rachel employs her strength in facilitation, coaching, storytelling, and organizational clarity to meet leaders and their teams where they're at so they can get clear on their direction, use their authentic voices, and grow sustainably while holding their most important relationships with care. Rachel believes that leadership is a verb, not a noun, and that it's not a title, and continues to engage in reflective practice in her work and personal growth, focusing on collective liberation, decolonization, power, and relational ways of being. It is both a privilege and a delight to call Rachel a collaborator as well as a friend. I'm just Peach. She'll be joining us again today. Hello, Rachel.
Hey, Miriam.
Well, welcome back.
Thank you. I am so happy to be back.
I am happy to have you back. So today, we're going to be talking about people-centered leadership, which is exciting. It's something I care about. I know that you care about it. For folks who are unfamiliar, can you share a little bit about what people-centered leadership is?
Sure. So I've been thinking about this a lot. I think about things a lot. And I think I'll talk a little bit about what it is to me and also a little bit about what it isn't, because you can Google it. And I did. There's lots out there. There's lots out there, and I'm not necessarily, the way that I think of people-centered leadership is not necessarily a singular framework that's anybody's, but there are some intentional reasons that I tend to use that language and I tend to operate in that way. One being, I intentionally use people-centered instead of human-centered because I have sort of a background in, purpose-driven business, and I've worked across sectors, and, humans are important, and so is the environment that we exist within. And so really thinking about, more broadly than humans alone, but also largely humans, because when we're talking about leadership, we're typically talking about relationships with each other. But thinking about our impact on the environment and, non-human life is an important piece of that for me. It's not necessarily something that shows up in every single interaction, obviously, but it's part of my thinking. It is, at the end of the day, it's about relationships. We are all interconnected, whether we want to be or not sometimes, and so it's really recognizing that piece. What I think is important also is what it's not. So it's not, taking care of people to the point of draining oneself, for example. So And that's a really easy place to step into when we start using things like, compassion, empathy, and really holding our relationships with a lot of care, it's very easy to step over into that, this is about you versus this is about us. Yeah. And I think that's a really important piece to be very, very mindful of. I had a coach, Jody Egan, who once said to me when I was grappling with how to, take care of my team, and the language that we were using was, team over self, or, people over paychecks. And that was really important language for us to be mindful of, because what we were trying to get to was like, how do you get your ego out of the way of what you're trying to do? And he reminded me one day, you're a people too. And that's actually the language that he said to me. And I was like, yeah, I am a people too. And so, so that's a really big part of it for me as well, is, that when we're looking at relationships and we're looking at care and we're bringing, empathy and compassion into our relationships, that it's about getting somewhere together rather than, giving up in order for someone to get, or vice versa. So it's finding a good equilibrium there. So I think that's a really, there's a nuance in that that's really tough to get to.
Yeah. But I think you speak to a good point of it's really removing that centering individualism. Yeah. So it's not necessarily, because we can care about others and also still inadvertently center individualism.
Exactly.
Whereas people-centered leadership really focuses in on that collective mindset, like how we're all in this together. Again, as you said, whether we want to be or not, we've talked about this in the past. Community isn't just friends, it is everyone involved. The same goes with workplaces and organizations that we're a part of. It's not just the people we like, it is everyone.
Yeah.
And so how do we center that everyone mindset, which, I think often does include acknowledging and reckoning with ego in many ways.
Absolutely. And it's not nice. I think that's the other piece, is it's not always nice. Mm-hmm. When there's an opportunity for someone to grow through a hard thing, choosing to be nice and not address the issue is actually not super kind to that person or others, right? Like there's an opportunity to be in intentional relationship with each other as we look at, hey, I know you. I don't think that's how you want to be showing up.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about that? And can we figure out how to do that together? So, I mean, it's not about, it's not about being friends, and it's not about being nice. It's about, there can be elements of that, of course. And if you happen to become friends as well, that's cool, but that's not the goal.
Yeah.
The goal is, we're all imperfect beings on this ride together, and it's figuring out how to kind of get through it while honoring that we're all imperfect beings on this ride together.
I think, I believe you and I have had this conversation possibly on the last episode that we were on together, but certainly just in life around, growing pains are called that for a reason. Uh-huh. And, change doesn't happen without friction.
That's it.
And that's okay.
It's okay.
Yeah. Okay. So kind of, acknowledging what people-centered leadership is, why do we need people-centered leadership, particularly within organizations that are often found in the impact sector?
So organizations currently, it's hard to say what's going to happen. Technology's everywhere. AI is that's a whole different episode probably. But organizations don't exist without people, mm-hmm. right? So if we're not acknowledging that first, and we're not thinking about what do people need in order to show up in the way that they need to show up, mm-hmm. In the way that is productive for the work of the organization, but also healthy for them, so that they can. I don't generally like to think about how do you build your life so that you're always contributing to an organization in a meaningful way, but how are folks cared for in a way that allows them to do their best at work and also allows them to not be working all the time, right? So it allows them to be well, allows for, a healthy relationship dynamic between work and self. So that's just, no matter what kind of organization you have, recognizing that it doesn't exist without people. The people doing the work, the people, if you're in a for-profit business, right? The people buying from you, if you're, a charity nonprofit, the folks that you serve, also the folks who, give you funds so that you can continue, doing the important work that you do. Recognizing all of those humans and all of those dynamics is really critical, particularly in the impact sector where, I would hope there is actually deep relationship with the communities that are being served. Recognizing what they need, how to meet them where they are is critical. Recognizing what the people doing the work need, how to meet them where they are, how to support them in being healthy and well in the face of, ongoing economic challenges with being able to do that, well. All of that is really important. And recognizing that, different people have different needs, and really holding those relationships in a good way is really important. I mean, the nonprofit sector as a whole is struggling with, just as it always has, with, capacity issues and not enough funds to get the work done, so people get burnt out, but it's even worse. Yeah. It's even harder now for a lot of reasons. Folks are still, navigating many of their own personal stressors. And so I think there's an opportunity for folks to really think about, what am I doing this for? If that shows up alongside, greater funding constraints and, it's really hard. And so we are seeing folks leave the sector. And so, then I look at, where are the opportunities to actually hold folks meaningfully, because this is work that needs to get done. And depending on what issues you're talking about, it's work that needs to get done even more than ever before, right? Yeah. So in our community, for example, the rate of folks experiencing homelessness is not like numbers that we have seen previously. Yeah. And going a step beyond that, people are not numbers, and the needs that folks have are increasingly complex as well. So how do we hold knowing all of that? Yes. While holding, how to run organizations effectively so they can do the work that they need to do? It's people. Yeah. And I think, again, conversations that you and I have had in the past around, we need diverse perspectives within the specifically nonprofit sector in order to really understand fulsome solutions and attainable solutions. And having those diverse perspectives often comes from diverse living experiences, which means that the traditional path and history of the nonprofit sector needs to shift in terms of who's represented in the workforce here. And that means that holding the whole humanness becomes trickier, because there are different needs and barriers that folks experiencing in their lives as a result, because of those diverse experiences of just being a human. So it's actually a necessity for us to have those diverse perspectives and experiences in the sector. And therefore, it is a necessity to be able to care for those people who are working in them, so that they don't get burnt out and leave or can't exist within the sector, because we need them in order for the sector to exist. There's so many pieces of that, right? Yeah. So there's a shift from, doing for, or I say sometimes doing to doing with, working with. And so that's a really important piece is, how do we effectively engage with community and really look at what do folks need, and how do we, work together, and then also bringing folks with lived experience into the workplace, where in the sector as a whole, we have more precarious work, not always decent wages, living wage is even a bit of a stretch for a lot of folks, in a lot of cases, no benefits, so really bringing shifting that intention, which I think is a really good intention, into, but what's the impact of that is we've got folks doing work, but without necessarily the same relationship with the work as someone who holds a lot of privilege, who has, maybe a partner who has a full-time job and benefits. With like short-term contracts and no benefits, it's actually like, okay, right? There's a lot in there. There's a lot at sort of a systems level that needs to shift. If we really are bringing that, how do we make our communities stronger? How do we, how do we support community in a meaningful way at sort of all levels? So, my mind is always, I operate at a systems level of thinking and an individual level of relationships. And I think that's a really big piece of what people-centered leadership looks like for me as well.
Yeah. And so going to that piece around, you lightly touched on it earlier, it seems as though often there's this perspective that it's either one or the other. You either have an organization that creates an empathetic and compassionate work culture, or you have an organization that is able to achieve metrics and goals and outcomes. And there's this perspective or this idea that you can't have both. So is it possible to have both?
100%. And in fact, I think they necessarily go hand in hand. So let's say at an individual HR level, right? The relationships that, a manager might have with the person reporting to them. I generally don't say everybody experiences X because, it's generally not true. But I'd be surprised to come across a person who doesn't have a goal.
Yeah.
Now, their goals might be different. Someone's goal might be to be able to afford rent and dinner, where someone else's goal might be to be perceived as a thought leader in blah, 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 right? But everybody has goals. So, those are conversations that everybody, I hope, is having with the folks that they're working with. And everybody has things that are in the way of their goals, right? So hopefully folks are having those conversations as well. And those relationships between, where we have a standard or a traditional hierarchy in an organization, those conversations I hope are commonplace and happen everywhere. So, if you truly approach those conversations with the relationship with the other person in mind, and can bring compassion and empathy into those conversations, you are doing both. You are working toward how can I help you be most effective in your day-to-day here, while, and that ladders up to what we're trying to accomplish, as an organization. How do I do that effectively within the scope of what, my own power and whatever? But approaching that in a relational way versus, a simple transaction of like, I asked that question, I got that answer. I asked that question, I got that answer. There's the next step of I listened and then I did. As a result, like those things really go hand in hand. What I would also say is I think, within the sector in particular, it's very common to see mission creep and, because of funding and whatever the case may be. When we really center relationships with others, things do get more complex. I'm not going to pretend they don't. Of course they do. But that makes it that much more important that you're crystal clear about where you're going, because what you can accomplish when you have everybody rowing in the same direction is incredible. It's forcing the clarity that I think is really uncomfortable for folks. And when you have a large group of people who are tightly held together with a strong, interweaving of relationships working toward a common goal, how can you not do exceptional things, right? So I think those things absolutely go hand in hand. And in fact, if you have one of those two things missing, you really limit yourself.
Yeah, and I think oftentimes that perspective of you need one or the other is almost rooted in that the people-centered piece is about being nice.
It is not.
Because it really does come down to, being people-centered does not mean not having accountability. It also doesn't mean not owning responsibility. It's an integral part of people-centered leadership. And when you have those things and, potentially using tools, action trackers, accountability measures, whatever folks need to actually be able to achieve what they're hoping to achieve in terms of their goals, then, they're connected. And you can still hold those pieces and that accountability and responsibility with compassion. It is not a robot doing this, it is a human, and things will come up. And so how do you navigate that collectively versus, you didn't do it, therefore you are bad, whatever that means.
That's it. I mean, in what relationship do you not have some degree of accountability to show up in a certain kind of way in order for that relationship to be healthy, whether it's at work or elsewhere. And when that's missing, generally speaking, I often say, because, who doesn't come from a, complex, early set of experiences, right? I think, but I always say, the more normal folks look, the more it freaks me out that, maybe there's something going on under the surface. So the more, super easy I see relationship dynamics between people where nothing ever comes to the surface, I'm like, what's going on here and who's hiding what? Because truly, I think, relationships are complex, and like I said, we're imperfect humans. There will always be moments where we can go, oh, I can learn from that. I could have done that better. Maybe I should say something. Maybe I just do things differently. I don't know. But how you navigate that is, depends on the relationship. But we all have real accountability in all of our relationships. That's a part of what makes them function.
Exactly. Yeah. So thinking about those pieces of, how can folks either implement people-centered leadership if that is the role that they're in, if they're leaders within their organization, or, not necessarily, because people-centered leadership also shows up in community too. So what are some practical steps that people can take to implement people-centered leadership?
So I've got a little and a big for this. So little things, I'll say, professionally, something that I have done in my sort of positional leadership experience, which is not the only way to do leadership, of course. Leadership that's a verb anyway. It's how you show up. But in my sort of formal one-on-one conversations with folks, this is something I learned from the entrepreneurial operating system. I would have one-on-one conversations where we would talk about the issues we need to talk about. And it would not be about what did you do wrong, what did I do wrong, or whatever. We would talk about the issue. And then we would talk about what do you have capacity to take on, and what do I have capacity to take on, and also what's your responsibility, and what do you have the authority to actually influence, and what do I have the responsibility and accountability and authority to actually influence, right? Because when we ask folks to make changes that are not actually within the scope of what they can control or influence, that's so deeply harmful. So when we look at the issue, let's look at, our sales targets aren't what we wanted them to be, or, we haven't reached enough folks in community. What is happening? We're not seeing, folks come to us as they're a trust issue that we need to work out, or whatever the case may be. What's the conversation we need to have about what you're noticing, what I'm noticing, what you can do, what I can do? That is in the context of our relationship. And that's a way that we can check back in on, marrying the metrics and the person. We can check back in on our progress on that. At a larger scale, first and foremost, getting clear on how we want to work together, whether that's, in a smaller community group or within an organization that's going through a lot of change, beginning at the top of a meeting. Even how do we want to show up in this meeting together? What are our shared agreements for entering into this space? And then bringing that maybe to a broader team level, like what can that look like? And coming back to it over and over again and holding ourselves accountable to it. Those I think are really important pieces. And then the other is more a behavior. So it's not a specific thing, but I would say listening is important, and then acting upon what we hear from folks, whether it's top down, bottom up, laterally, from community to organization, whatever the case may be. And then if we can't do anything about the thing that needs to be addressed, explaining why, explaining that it's important to us too. And these are the reasons that it's not really available to us. But I think, practicing being vulnerable in that way, not having all the answers, not necessarily being able to do all the things that we want to be able to do, practicing entering into those spaces where folks might be disappointed with us. All of those things are a part of it.
Yeah, because I think often when we take on more than is possible or what we're capable of or what we have the expertise to take on, it's often because we don't want to disappoint, and then also what ends up happening is harm. So
exactly.
Yeah. So you shared a lot of really helpful and wonderful things. If folks want to find out more information about you and the work that you do, to dive deeper into this with you, how can they do that?
Of course. So my website is rachel.berdan.ca, and I am semi-active on LinkedIn, Rachel Berdan, and I am on Instagram, but it's my dog and knitting, so it's not really going to give you a window into my perspective on leadership. But if that's your jam, he's cute.
He's cute. I love him a lot. Thank you, Rachel, for joining us again, and for having conversations that usually happen over text or voice note or in person.
Yes.
In front of a camera. Really appreciate it.
Of course, anytime.
And yeah, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you again to Rachel for joining us today. Time spent chatting with Rachel is one of my favorite ways to spend time. If you'd like to connect with Rachel or learn more about the ways that she can support you or your team, head on over to her website at rachel.berdan.ca. For more information about Pillar Nonprofit Network and the work being done at this organization, you can head on over to pillarnonprofit.ca. There you can find more information on our social impact programming and find out details about how we can support social impact programming either through learning and development or tailored consulting. Once again, I am your host, your guide, your business bud, Miriam Waliji, and this has been Pollinating Purpose, a caring approach to business. Thank you again for coming along for the ride. We're happy that you're here.